Hi, Dave. We've just got Jim coming in as well. Went to the wrong link initially. I went to the 17th one, and Jim's gone to the 31st one.
I'm here, Dave.
Hey, Jim. Philippa Rowland's turned the joinery, hoping to see you guys.
Oh, that's a pity.
She's jumped on. She'll be on there from her car on the way home.
Great.
All right, let's make you co-hosts. Where are you at?
Dave Sweeney is going first tonight.
Okay. Oh, come on. There we go.
And David, you will need to give me screen sharing. I think that's probably what you're doing right now.
That is what I'm doing right now. That should be done. As soon as you're ready, I'll admit everyone.
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right. We've got 75 registered tonight. All right, I think the first group of people are all driving in. Thank you very much for joining us. We've got Dave and Jim here ready to go. We'll just wait a couple of minutes while more people filter in, and then we'll kick off. I'll just ask everyone to stay muted during the call, because there's going to be quite a few people on. We've got 75 people registered, probably expecting about 40 or so. All right, I'll just acknowledge that we're meeting on Kaurna country, at least that's where I am. So feel free to put your location and acknowledgement in the chat if you wish. Pay respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge that we've got a lot more work to do in most of our activities and organisations to make them safe and inviting spaces for people that we're trying to be in solidarity with. Okay. All right, we might get moving. So tonight is just a basic briefing on the nuclear situation, given the coalition's announcements of their plans recently. A number of people were keen to just sort of be able to ask questions and get an outline of the issues. And Dave and Jim kindly agreed to do that for us. So Jim did his PhD on, I think you said it was the Hindmarsh Island nuclear stuff. Is that right, Jim?
Lucas Heights.
Lucas Heights, sorry. Oh, the Sydney one, yep. And is the Friends of the Earth National Nuclear Campaigner. Dave is the ACF Nuclear Free Campaigner. Is that right, Dave?
That's right, David, yes.
There's a long history of contributing in this area, and we'll be able to are the right people to give us an overview. Feel free to give yourselves any further introductions, and I might let you go for it. We'll do questions at the end. And if you can just ask them in the chat, then I'll be able to just put them through. Anything else before we get started? Okay. All right, Dave, all yours.
Thank you very much, David, and thanks to you and the crew at CCSA for organising and inviting and providing this opportunity. My name's Dave Sweeney. I'm talking to you today from Naarm, from Melbourne on Wurundjeri land, and extend my acknowledgement to the Kaurna people, where most of you will probably be hearing this, and wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners, not only because that's the appropriate thing to do in a country where there's such deep unfinished business, but also it's completely appropriate when we're talking nuclear because First Nations people in this country have been at the forefront of disproportionate and adverse impacts of the nuclear industry, and particularly in South Australia. And for many of you on this call, that'll not be news. Like, there's been British nuclear testing, uranium mining impacts, and multiple waste dump fights, of which many of you have been actively involved. And I think what South Australia has shown is a long history of nuclear-free advocacy, and it's been very effective and it's been very important, and particularly around waste issues and the South Australian Royal Commission of mid-last decade. And this tradition and skill base of community action and resistance is particularly important now in this current push. There's a lot of things that we don't know, like cost, reactor type, proportion of the energy mix, ownership structure, a whole range of questions around transportation and waste management. A lot of things we don't know about the coalition's nuclear push. A bit ambitious to call it a plan with the lack of details, but there are some things that we do know. We do know that it's a ad hoc, contradictory, and chaotic, really, political fix that seeks to do a number of things. It seeks to unite a disparate coalition from techno enthusiast libs through to renewable phobic nats under one policy umbrella. It seeks to cover up over a decade of climate denial and inaction whilst the coalition was in government, including inaction on advancing nuclear, the solution they're so now enraptured with. It's a crude political attempt to wedge Labor, particularly around AUKUS, and it's an attempt to harness Trumpian-style cost of living disaffection and site-specific, some legitimate, some mischievous, concerns about the renewable rollout into a voice style, and by that I mean not the independence, the climate independence in the federal parliament. I mean the referendum we had last October, where there were positions taken that had limited or no connection to reality, evidence, or truth. And the other thing that this push attempts to do is cement fossil fuels in Australia's future energy mix. The plan is being endorsed and welcomed by the Mineral Council of Australia, and the big winner in this plan is gas, Australian gas. So we know also that the coalition, the self-proclaimed champion of small government, free market, states' rights, is jettisoning all of these formerly foundation principles in order to advance this proposal. When on June 19, when Peter Dutton, Ted O'Brien, Angus Taylor and others announced this plan, there was very little detail, there was a lot of adjectives, and they were very quick to point out that they were prepared to use Commonwealth override powers to overcome state opposition, which is indeed also a real factor in South Australia where there's clear opposition to this in a legal sense, that they were prepared to set up a national nuclear authority, largely because existing energy transmitters and funders and generators didn't want to touch nuclear, that they were absolutely prepared to override community opposition in what they term the national, but it's better to say the national's interest. They actually very quickly ruled out that communities would have a say in this. And perhaps most starkly, in one sense, the party of private property said, before picking up the phone and speaking to the utilities, said on national media that they would use compulsory acquisition powers to purchase these sites, most of, if not all, of which are currently being repurposed into renewable energy generation sites. So this is all the hallmarks of a command economy with Peter Dutton as the commander-in-chief. And so I think it's really critical to understand and to know in this debate. And I just want to frame some of the politics before Jim sets out the lack of coherent policy position, the lack of suitable applicability of this energy source for Australia. But nuclear is not only demonstrably, don't believe ACF or Friends of the Earth, but every independent analysis, including the CSIRO Gen Cost, the CSIRO Gen Cost report, and so many other reports, have shown that nuclear is demonstrably the slowest and most expensive energy option for Australia. And it has also unique safety and security implications. And it creates a massive intergenerational waste. And it's also an active distraction to credible, effective climate action. And that's the reason why national environment groups like ACF and Friends of the Earth and state groups like all the conservation councils and so many others are taking this threat seriously and mobilising to oppose it. It's for two primary reasons. One is because nuclear brings with it a host of risks, a host of problems, and a lasting legacy. It has a very long tail. The other thing is that this plan is come from a space of seeking to actively and consciously derail effective climate action. Paul Callity, the editor-in-chief of The Australian, said recently that the intended consequence of this policy is to derail the renewable transition by injecting uncertainty. We all know that money hates uncertainty, and Peter Dutton's plan is to inject uncertainty, division, delay, all of which aims to derail the renewable rollout. And we've seen that today. There's media stories today of solar projects being put on ice because of uncertainty over longer term government policy and whether there's bipartisan policy. Now, we know that coal is on its way out. Most will be gone in 10 years, all will be gone in 15. That's extraordinary, really. It powered Australia for a century, and now it's going to be gone. So what do we replace it with? At the moment, 35% thereabouts of our national power is generated and supplied by renewable energy sources, proven, deployable, vastly safer and cheaper. In South Australia, it's many times more. It's around 75%. And so that is the pathway forward that environment groups, energy producers, energy users, businesses all see as the most credible way to ensure that we keep the emergency lights off and the house lights on into the future. And to interrupt this renewable rollout, that's not to say that we can't be critical of specific renewable projects, but to interrupt the rollout, to deliberately seek to delay and derail that is nothing less than economic and environmental sabotage. And what we have here from the political party that tossed coal around Parliament, they now want to cap and scrap our renewable energy future. And that is an enormously dangerous prospect. It cannot be allowed to happen. Now, we have solid political and institutional support. We have federal prohibitions. We have state legal and policy bans. We have the market, from energy makers to energy funders, not convinced or else actively opposed to nuclear. We have the evidence that is overwhelmingly opposed to nuclear. We have very clear and powerful and cogent case. But we're living in strange times, and we're living with some players in this debate are not good faith actors. And we will face in the period between now and the federal election, a barrage of social media, a barrage of often unhinged, untethered, often always unhelpful commentary, some explicitly based around misinformation. So there will be a real responsibility for those of us who have been around the block a few times on this issue, and that's very much a South Australian reality, or who are new to this issue but want to see a secure, safe, systematic and sensible energy system and energy rollout. We will need to be to articulate a clear, consistent, cogent critique. And as some have said, all of us who want to see a secure energy future will need to be anti-nuclear or nuclear-free advocates up until the next election. So I suppose I would like to just finish by saying that for those of us who have been involved in nuclear politics for a long time, nothing has changed. The fundamentals of this issue remain the same. The problems, constraints, and difficulties facing the industry remain the same. The waste remains the same. The risks remain the same. There's no great technological breakthrough, and yet we have a massive technological and economic breakthrough with renewables, which is being threatened by this. And we cannot play politics. We haven't got the time to waste. We don't want radioactive waste. We don't need to have radioactive waste. And we do not have the time to play politics with Australia's economy, Australia's environment, and the Australian people's access to reliable and secure and affordable electricity. And that's what's at stake here. So I will hand over now to Jim to just run us through some of those constraints, some of those problems, and some of those obstacles. But I'd just say that we are very keen and to take questions and comment, and we are very keen to keep this dialogue going. And we believe that this is an essential opportunity here. We have the opportunity to put the nuclear question to bed in this country and to get on with seriously, systematically, safely securing a much better and safer future. So I'll leave it to Tim to the details, and I thank you very much for the opportunity to speak tonight.
Thanks for that, Dave. So I'm Jim Green, and I'm the National Nuclear Campaigner with Friends of the Earth Australia, and I'm going to run through this PowerPoint presentation. There's so much detail in here that I won't be able to go through it in full detail, but please do feel free to download this presentation and learn from it and educate others. And if you want, you can make this your presentation and edit it as you please. So let's jump in. Before we get to the coalition's plans for nuclear power in Australia, I think it's important to have some international context. And that context is that nuclear power is going terribly all around the world. It's fallen from 17.5% of global electricity generation to just 9.2% now. So that's barely half its historic peak. Renewables have grown to 30.2%. The IEA expects renewables to reach 42% by 2028. And there are three main reasons for this. One is the massive cost reductions for renewables, the massive cost for nuclear, and the various impacts of the Fukushima disaster. And if you look at that graph on the right, that's the percentage contribution to global electricity generation. And as you can see, renewables is going gangbusters, and nuclear is in serious decline. And just a few more points about the parlous state of nuclear power around the world. And I focus these comments on Australia's AUKUS partners, the US and the UK. In the US, there have only been two recent nuclear power projects. One was in South Carolina that was abandoned in 2017 after the expenditure of around 13.6 billion Australian dollars. Westinghouse then filed for bankruptcy protection, and that left just one remaining project in the state of Georgia. It was recently completed, but at an astronomical cost of about $25.7 billion per reactor. And bizarrely, the Dutton Coalition is promoting these AP1000 reactors. And we're told that there's a nuclear power renaissance going on around the world, but in the US, the world's leading nuclear country, there is literally 0 nuclear reactors under construction. In the UK, the situation is equally terrible. Just one project. This is 2 reactors under construction at Hinkley Point. The cost has escalated to 43.5 billion Australian dollars per reactor. It's true that they're very large reactors, but even so, the sticker shock is shocking. And this brings me to the golden rule of nuclear economics, which is add a 0 to industry cost estimates. And the US and the UK illustrate this point. In both cases, the latest cost estimates are more than 10 times higher than early estimates. And if and when the coalition releases its cost estimates for nuclear power in Australia, those estimates will be a small fraction of the real costs of nuclear power. Before I move on, I said that nuclear power is going terribly all around the world. Well, there's one country with a non-trivial nuclear expansion program. That's China. But even in China, it's nothing to get terribly excited about. The figures last year were 1 gigawatt of new nuclear power in China compared to 278 gigawatts of new renewables. So that's the showpiece for the nuclear industry is China, where there is literally no comparison between nuclear and renewables. So moving on to the coalition's plans for Australia. Power reactors at 7 closed or soon to be closed power sites, including one in South Australia. We don't know how many reactors will be built at those sites. In South Australia and WA, they're saying there'll be small modular reactors. And we can take some comfort from that because small modular reactors do not exist. They will be government funded, and the reason for that is that industry would not touch this project with a barge pole. For 10, 15, 20 years, we've been said we should remove the ban on nuclear power, the federal legal ban, and let them ride. Well, 2 questions arise. Firstly, it was the Howard government that instituted the ban, and the Abbott, Turnbull and Morrison coalition governments kept the ban. The second point is that industry would not touch this with a barge pole. So Peter Dutton is talking about government-funded reactors. The coalition says the first reactors would be operating in the mid-2030s, but in reality, they couldn't begin operating until the mid-2040s. And that's a big problem because all the coal plants will be shut by the mid to late 2030s. And if realised, the coalition's nuclear plan would result in 5 to 10% of nuclear power generation in Australia by 2050. So keep in mind that this is being sold as a silver bullet and the solution to all our problems, but at best, nuclear power would be making a small contribution. South Australia, this is arguably the silliest of the proposals from the Dutton Coalition. We will get 1 or more nuclear power reactors, whether we like it or not. In other words, we don't get any say in the matter, except at the upcoming federal election. If the coalition is elected, then they will claim a mandate to do what they want. What they want to do is to build nuclear power reactors in South Australia. And even more bizarrely, we will get nuclear power in South Australia, whether or not we need the additional power supply. And keep in mind this breathtaking, hard to believe transition in South Australia in recent years. We've gone from 1% renewables to 74% over the past 16 years. And the government aims to reach 100% net renewables in just a few years' time. Whether or not that target is met, it's certainly true that South Australia will reach 100% net renewables long before a nuclear reactor could possibly begin generating electricity 20 years from now. And the site in SA that's being targeted is the Northern Power Station near Port Augusta. It was shut down in 2016. The region's since become a renewables hub. The coalition claims that using old coal power sites generates all sorts of synergies and cost reductions. And in particular, it claims that costs could be reduced by 1/3 by making use of the existing workforce, the existing electricity transmission infrastructure, and various bits of technical infrastructure like steam turbines and so on. But, of what relevance is that to the Northern Power Station, which was closed 8 years ago? The infrastructure is gone, the workforce is long gone, and the transmission infrastructure is being used for renewables. So if the coalition was to build a nuclear power plant near Port Augusta, they would have to build new transmission lines as well. Premier Peter Malinauskas is uranium and pro-all, but his nuclear power does not stack up in South Australia. And I won't go through this slide in detail, but I think it's important and interesting to note that there's all sorts of divisions within the coalition regarding the Dutton plan for nuclear power reactors at 7 sites around Australia. And the most important part of that opposition is that the Liberal and coalition leaders in the 5 states being targeted for nuclear power are either sitting on the fence, in the case of David Spears here in South Australia, or they're clearly opposed, which applies to the other 4 states. Malcolm Turnbull says the policy is bonkers. Matt Keane is a former New South Wales Deputy Premier, now head of the Climate Change Authority. He's a strong critic. Former Liberal leader John Hewson, and all sorts of divisions within the coalition. I won't go through that in detail. Could a coalition government deliver its nuclear power plans? Well, possibly. Yes, it could use taxpayer funds if elected. Yes, a coalition government could override opposition from state governments, including the legal bans. Yes, it could use compulsory acquisition laws to acquire the sites from the current owners. Yes, it could call an opposition from traditional owners. But perhaps the major obstacle would be getting the necessary legislation through the Senate. Greenhouse emissions. If the coalition's policy was a good faith policy where we would pursue renewables and nuclear, we would slowly replace fossil fuels, but the contribution of nuclear power to that equation would be that it would slow the transition and make it more expensive and make it more dangerous. But that's a hypothetical. It is absolutely not a good faith policy from the coalition. The coalition wants to derail the transition to low carbon power and to prolong the life of coal plants and probably build new coal plants and to massively increase the use of gas. And I think Malcolm Turnbull summed it up nicely by saying the science-denying element in the coalition is crazy and to some extent getting crazier. They simply do not accept climate science, and they also have an ideological opposition to renewable energy. So those are strong claims, but there's an abundance of evidence to prove that the coalition plans to derail the transition to renewables and to low carbon power. And one example of that is the coalition does not accept the government's target of 82% renewables by 2030, opposes the government's target to cut emissions by 43% by 2030, plans to rip up contracts signed by the Commonwealth in its capacity investment scheme. The Nationals are calling for a moratorium on the rollout of large-scale renewables, and that will probably become formal coalition policy. withdrawing Australia's pledge at the COP28 conference to triple renewables and double the rate of energy efficiency by 2030. And the coalition would sign Australia up to a COP28 pledge to triple nuclear by 2050. And Queensland National Party Senator Matt Canavan says the coalition intends to shut down the Climate Change Authority. And keep in mind, there's some history here. The Abbott government defunded the Independent Climate Commission and tried but failed to kill off the Climate Change Authority and the Australian Renewable Energy Agency. So the net result of the coalition's policies would be a massive increase in greenhouse emissions, despite it being sold as a good faith policy to reduce emissions. CSIRO says that nuclear won't be able to make a meaningful contribution to achieving net zero emissions by 2050. An academic study finds that the coalition's policies would increase emissions by 1,462 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent to 2050. Another analysis finds the increase would be 2.3 billion tonnes between now and 2050. A report by Bloomberg New Energy Finance finds that a nuclear-powered Australian economy would result in higher cost electricity and would sound the death knell for decarbonisation efforts. An academic study finds that Australia's carbon budget may blow out by 40% under the coalition's plan. And primarily for those reasons, because it's not a good faith policy and because it will result in huge increases in greenhouse emissions, this policy has near zero support from credible scientists in Australia. The chief scientist, Kathy Foley, says nuclear is expensive and would take some time to build up the capability. Former Australian chief scientist Alan Finkel says that nuclear is too slow and expensive. Another former chief scientist, Robin Batterham, says to reduce renewable targets in the belief that nuclear will be deployed later at scale would create a material risk of not achieving net zero or doing so at excessive cost. New South Wales Chief Scientist Hugh Durrant-White says it would be naive to think a nuclear power plant could be built in less than 2 decades, and he's had much more to say on the topic as well. He wrote a report for the New South Wales Cabinet, and that's been widely reported, and it's very significant, not least because Hugh Durrant-White had a significant role in the British nuclear program before he moved to Australia. CSIRO says that nuclear power does not provide an economically competitive solution and could not be deployed within a timeframe required. And the Climate Council says that nuclear power plants are not appropriate for Australia and probably never will be. Nuclear power is simply too slow, especially in the context of plans to shut down all of Australia's coal plants within the next 10 to 15 years. Nuclear power would require at least 10 years for licensing, planning, site selection, and a raft of other activities. Another 10 years for construction and 6.5 years, give or take, to repay the energy and carbon debts. So nuclear power could not contribute to greenhouse emissions reductions until 2050 or thereabouts. And there are plenty of overseas examples which give the lie to the claim by the coalition that we could have nuclear reactors operating in Australia by the mid-2030s. And Dr. Alan Finkel, a former Australian chief scientist, sums it up very neatly by saying, any call to go directly from coal to nuclear is effectively a call to delay decarbonisation of our electricity system by 20 years. Too expensive. I won't go through all these reports, but you can download this PowerPoint and click on those links to get the details. The ACF Power Games report, it found that nuclear costs would need to come down by 2/3 to compete with firmed renewables. And by firmed renewables, I mean renewables coupled to energy storage, so you have reliable power. As I mentioned before, the coalition says that using infrastructure at coal plants could reduce costs by 1/3. Well, that's entirely speculative, but even if it was to be achieved, it would still not nearly enough. And replacing Australia's entire coal generating capacity with nuclear would cost at least $500 billion. A report prepared for the Clean Energy Council finds that nuclear is up to 6 times more expensive than renewables. A report by academics, or a summary by academics in the Australian Financial Review, finds that even if all that mattered was the cheapest possible energy that meets minimum levels of reliability and emissions, the coalition's plan fails. Power bills could rise by $1,000 a year under the coalition's plan. And keep in mind that the coalition is clearly stating that it will reduce power bills. It will do no such thing. It will increase power bills. And the best guess at the moment, on the basis of the limited information that has been provided by the coalition, is that household power bills will rise by $1,000 a year under the coalition's plan. Some more reports on economics. A report in the Australian Financial Review. It beggars belief that the alternative government proposes nationalising an uncosted nuclear debt bomb and detonating it at the heart of domestic energy and climate policy. They estimate the physical damage would be in the order of a minimum of $100 billion, but likely considerably more. Another study, nuclear power could cost up to $600 billion. That's building 7 reactors, but keep in mind that the latest iteration of the coalition's plan is that we could have multiple reactors at each of the sites. So we're talking probably $500 billion at least. And CSIRO's Jan cost report is very important, and you can easily look that up online or just click the link here on the PowerPoint. Suffice it to say that nuclear power, large or small, is far more expensive than firmed renewables. Small modular reactors, I won't say much about SMRs because they don't exist. The definition is a capacity of 300 megawatts or less, and serial factory production of reactor components. The idea is that you use reactors in factories, mass produce them, you would seriously reduce costs. You could potentially get some benefits in terms of quality control, as opposed to the current practice, which is that essentially every reactor is a bespoke individual construction project. It's said that there are 2 existing SMRs worldwide, both of them twin reactor plants, one in China, one in Russia, but neither of them used modular construction techniques, and they could not even be called prototype SMRs since there are no plans to produce more. So SMRs don't exist. And there are many failed SMR projects. I could list a dozen of them, but the most recent and the most spectacular of these failures was NuScale in the US, which abandoned its first project after cost rose to a ridiculous $14 billion for a 462 megawatt plant. Too risky. I'm going to go over these very to download the PowerPoint and to read more. Firstly, when we talk about risks, we're usually talking about accidents, catastrophic accidents such as Chernobyl and Fukushima, and that's obviously part of the risk, but I really want to emphasize that it's not the only profound and even existential risk that we face with nuclear. The other one is weapons proliferation, and the other one is attacks on nuclear plants. So catastrophic accidents, Chernobyl and Fukushima, the costs were around $1 trillion for each of those disasters. And the number of nuclear refugees refugees or evacuees is disturbing. 350,000 from Chernobyl and 160,000 from Fukushima. And I won't go into the death tolls. The death tolls are heavily contested, but I would encourage people to remember that regardless of the unresolvable debates over the death tolls, these are disasters by any stretch of the imagination, incredibly expensive and a profound social toll for the 500,000 nuclear evacuees or atomic refugees from Chernobyl and Fukushima alone. Nuclear power and weapons proliferation. I won't go into detail, but it's an interesting note that Australia's one and only serious pursuit of nuclear power 50 years ago was clearly motivated by a hidden weapons agenda. And we know that because the Prime Minister of the day, John Gorton, later acknowledged that there was a hidden weapons agenda. Nuclear winter. So there's a strong connection between nuclear power and nuclear weapons. If nuclear warfare takes place, then it has the potential to cause catastrophic climate change. And I think the neatest summary of these points is that fossil fuel burning is the surest route to climate catastrophe, and nuclear warfare is the fastest route to climate catastrophe. Military attacks on nuclear plants, there should be a much greater public understanding of this problem because it's happened time and time again. I've listed some examples there, but obviously there's the recent example of Ukraine where Russia has attacked a number of nuclear plants, seized control of a number of nuclear plants. And it's really more good luck than good management that there hasn't been a nuclear disaster on top of the existing horrors of the warfare going on in Ukraine. The International Atomic Energy Agency says that every single one of their crucial 7 indispensable pillars for ensuring nuclear safety and security has been compromised. Arguably, the most disturbing pattern has been loss of off-site power to the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. Every time off-site power is lost, there's an increased risk of nuclear meltdown. Every time there's a nuclear meltdown, there's an increased risk of a nuclear disaster. And all sorts of other problems at Zaporizhia and elsewhere in Ukraine that I won't go into. The most recent one is drone attacks on nuclear power plants. Just a few comments on nuclear waste. There is one repository of nuclear waste everywhere in the world. Sweden and Finland are quite well advanced in constructing repositories, but they're not operating yet. There is one operating repository for intermediate level waste, a deep underground repository, but it was disastrously mismanaged and under-regulated, resulting in a number of accidents, including an underground explosion in a nuclear waste barrel. There was the Mayak disaster in the Soviet Union in 1957. We've got serious nuclear waste legacies much closer to home. Just here in South Australia alone, we've got Maralinga, where they've had 4 cleanups, and there will have to be a 5th and a 6th.
Have we lost Jim?
I think we have.
Well, that's no good. I think he was sort of coming towards the end. Is that right, Dave? What I remember from last time?
Yes, he's just said that he has he's out. He's experiencing troubles, which I think is pretty salutary. Even the best laid schemes go wrong. Yeah, and he was coming to the end of his critique, certainly not to the end of sharing it. And I notice in the chat, people have asked, Philippa and others have asked about would myself and Jim, or in particular Jim's PowerPoint and insights be able to be shared? Absolutely, we're very happy to do this style of presentation. We're very happy, and Jim's put a number of times, I think, linked in the chat, his PowerPoint, which can be downloaded. It can also be accessed from the Friends of the Earth Australia nuclear website, and it's really good. And it has some very, very detailed links that take you through to lots of reports that make a compelling case. Like, if you're not actually driven on the fact that I want nuclear for a range of other reasons, there is a compelling environmental, economic, efficiency and energy case of for not advancing nuclear in this country. And Philippa, I noticed your thing that it was an excellent presentation. It was indeed. Thanks for putting up with a bit of a crunchy internet connection tonight, and that'll be passed on to Jim, that work.
Jim's back in now, I think. Are you with us, Jim?
I am, David. I could finish off my presentation if you want to let me screen share.
Absolutely. I'll get you to just give us the last 5 minutes so we can have some questions. There you go. You should be able to share it now.
Yeah, apologies for that, everyone. I'm not sure if that's this international IT problem or something closer to home, but I got the blue screen of death. So I was pretty close to being finished anyway. Military attacks on nuclear plants, it's not like a theoretical risk. It's something that has happened time and time again. Most commonly to prevent nuclear plants being used for weapons proliferation, but also for other reasons. And we've got a really clear illustration of the risks in the Ukraine at the moment. Nuclear waste, all sorts of problems, and all sorts of upcoming threats for plates in Australia. And I am just finishing off here. There's been a number of useful fact-checking articles in mainstream media, and I would encourage people to make use of these resources because it's very helpful to educate yourself and to educate others and to give you ammunition for when you're writing letters to newspapers or rigging up talkback radio or participating in debates or so on. So please download this PowerPoint and download these resources. And as I note up at the top here, we're also doing fact checking at the Don't Nuclear Climate website. And just to finish off, a number of resources. We're aiming to make Don't Nuke the Climate a central resource for the movement over the coming year or more. And that includes a website, social media, online webinars, campaign initiatives, and so on. The ACF Power Games report is well worth a read. Resources at Friends of the Earth and ACF. Renew Economy is doing an excellent job. The Electrical Trade Union. And once again, I would encourage you to download this PowerPoint and make use of it. And in terms of what's coming next, Conservation SA has got an upcoming webinar on July 31st. And David, you can speak to this, but it's essentially an open platform for people to discuss the next stages in this campaign. Nationally, ACF, FO and Don't Nuke the Climate have got another forum on August 3. In Adelaide, we're launching a campaign group on Saturday, August the 17th. And so please get involved in that. And on the Don't Nuke the Climate website, we're providing resources on what people can do to take action, whether it's petitions or upcoming events and so on. So I will leave it there and hand back to you, David.
Thanks a lot, Jim, and thank you both very much. As I put in the chat earlier, there's a follow-up meeting for anyone that wants to talk about actions to take in South Australia. There's a number of people have been working on this for quite some time, and Jim's from Adelaide. So we'll be holding an online Zoom on the 31st, and you can hop on that link and register if you'd like to come and talk about what you might like to do. Otherwise, for the rest of this time, feel free to put any questions you might have in the chat. We've got a few lined up, and so I'll start with them. And while we're doing that, you're very welcome to pop more in. So I've got one from Hugo about whether there's parts of the business sector that are supportive or strongly opposed or ambivalent to the coalition's announcements. Do either of you know where the business community is up to on this?
Yeah, business is almost universally hostile to this, whether it's the Business Council or the energy retailers such as AGL and Origin and so on. They're just not buying it at all in terms of the cost, the timelines, the public opposition and division. It just doesn't make sense. So that's one of the really interesting parts of this debate, is that there's so little support for the coalition's nuclear plans. I mean, historically, go back 10, 20 years, and there would have been business support. Go back 10, 20 years, and he would have had support from the Australian chief scientist and former chief scientist, but now there's opposition from all those parties. So, you know, really, Peter Dutton could fit all his supporters in a phone box at the moment. It's as simple as that. And Dave Swenny, jump in.
Yeah, just picking up on that point that Jim's made, just in the last week, there was a group of businesses calling for policy certainty, for consistency with the existing transition system, and for using the existing tools. All of that is, we don't want nuclear, we want renewables rolled out in a staged and sensible way. That was the Australian Industry Group, the Australian Aluminium Council, the Australian Energy Council, the Australian Steel Institute, the Cement Industry Federation, the Investor Group on Climate Change, the National Farmers Federation, and the Property Council of Australia. And so I think it highlights Jim's point about this isn't the mainstream opinion is very clearly that this nuclear plan is unworkable, uneconomic, and irresponsible, and above all, that it's unnecessary. Like, if we only had the choice between burning coal or splitting atoms, there's a difficult policy discussion. But we are blessed in this country with a whole range of renewable resources, smart people, good manufacturing, and that's the way to grow regional jobs, Australian energy security and independence, and keep emissions right down. And like, when you see those heavy hitters saying that they agree with that, when you see Rio Tinto saying that it wants to smelt its aluminium in Gladstone, not from coal and not from nuclear, but from renewables, and putting serious money up for one of Australia's largest wind and also one of Australia's largest solar proposals, it just shows the extent to which the coalition has drifted from any connection with mainstream economic reality in relation to its energy and climate policy.
Thanks, Dave. The next one I've got here is, there are comments floating around about nuclear and renewables being able to coexist and play nicely together. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah,
Jim, I might quickly go just on this one for one inst, and then let you, if that's okay. And it's just, it makes a lot of marketing sense, and I get it. You say that the line makes is the line where it says that we all love renewables, but they're, you know, the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. What happens then? And their friendly cousin, nuclear, can provide that sort of reliability. That's the argument, and it is just fallacious for so many reasons, but there's a couple in particular. Is that, you know, firmed renewables now are deeply reliable and are growing in capacity all the time. And where there is, when renewables kick in and flood the market, they actually completely cruel and make nuclear utterly uneconomic. And what we've seen in other jurisdictions is where there has been renewables and nuclear, the only way nuclear can be sustained is for renewables to be actively downgraded. And so some people talk about Dutton's plan as the death of rooftop solar. So I think it's very clear that they are not compatible. They're a binary choice here, not a compatible set. Jim?
That's exactly what I was going to say, Dave. I would just add that here in South Australia, we may or may not reach the target of 100% net renewables by 2027, but you know, the earliest opportunity for nuclear would be the mid-2040s. So what on earth is Peter Dutton thinking? I mean, if there's any rational thought going on inside his head whatsoever, it could only possibly be a renewables to nuclear transition, which makes no sense whatsoever. So it's just hard to believe that a major national political party is proposing something so idiotic.
Thanks. I don't have any more questions lined up. We've got about 4 minutes left. Maybe I'll play the ACF video. Dave and Jim, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's got 250,000 hits at least on the internet, and it's good fun.
I'll also paste it in the chat for people. All right, just give me 1 second. I'll bring it up. If anyone's got any final questions, please paste them in the chat. Otherwise, we'll play this video and then we'll say our thank yous and goodbyes. Share my screen.
Welcome back to Political Mastermind. The next mastermind vying for the top prize is...
Peter?
As your specialty topic, Peter, you've chosen Australia's energy rollout. Let's see how that goes for you. And all of us. What type of energy is illegal in Australia?
Nuclear energy?
Correct. Apart from being the most expensive option, nuclear is also what?
Unpopular?
Unpopular, slow and dangerous. Good title for the autobiography. According to you, Peter Dutton, the cost of nuclear would be what?
A big bill?
A big bill is correct.
Australians love big things. The big merino, the big pineapple, and my big nuclear bill. You're welcome.
Now, the cost will be big, but some of the nuclear reactors you're suggesting wouldn't be.
That's right, they're called small modular reactors. They're cute little fellas, like radioactive quackers.
And how many of these small modular reactors are operating anywhere in the world right now?
Heaps?
0. They haven't made one warm shower or cold beer anywhere. How long will nuclear waste be a problem?
1 election cycle?
100,000 years. Where will you build Australia's nuclear waste dump?
Pass.
You can't pass.
No, I mean I'll pass that problem on to someone else.
Oh, that's actually right. Well, it's not right, but correct. Final question, Peter. What am I? The CSIRO said I make the cheapest electricity, and by the time the first nuclear power station could be online, the Australian Energy Market Operator says I could already be providing 96% of Australia's energy. It's not nuclear.
Nuclear.
It costs 6 times less than nuclear.
Oh, well, that's obvious.
It already makes 35% of Australia's electricity.
Is it nuclear energy?
Wind and solar, Peter.
Bullshit.
Wow, what a political mastermind.
Did I win? Am I the Prime Minister yet?
We'll find out right after this election. Thanks for watching this toxic waste of everyone's time. Good night, Australia.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that. So just to say thank you very much to Jim and Dave for their time tonight. Thank you for everyone coming along. Please feel free to...
David, I wonder if we might ask Wendy if she wants to make a brief comment.
Oh, is Wendy here? Oh, sorry, yes, of course. We've got only a minute left, so Wendy, did you want to let us know what's been going on? I think you had a media release coming out last time you mentioned. I'll probably have to get you to unmute 1 second.
Yeah, just a quick call out. I have put a couple of links into the chat. The 7 regions that Dutton has proposed nuclear for have joined in an alliance and asking Australians to support the 7 regions to say no to nuclear. We won't let any region in Australia have nuclear, and it's important that we all stand together. So please sign the petition, spread it out among your friends. We will then put newspaper ads in to say we've got X amount of people signed on, X amount of organisations in alliance, and we're just going to really put it to the coalition. They said they don't believe anybody will oppose nuclear. Let's show them different.
Thanks, Wendy. And you're organising in... Where are you from?
Latrobe Valley in Victoria.
Latrobe Valley, thank you.
Latrobe Valley in Victoria.
Yep.
And organising across the 7 regions.
Brilliant. Thanks, Wendy. All right, so thanks everyone for coming. Please feel free to register for the follow-up event. Please sign Wendy's petition. Jim and Dave have said you're very welcome to get in touch with them if you'd like to get deeper into the detail. If you've got technical questions or want to learn more about certain things. And if there's more call for any events like this, we're happy to hold another one. Thank you very much. Hope you had a good evening, and see some of you on the 31st.
Thank you, David. Thanks to the Cons Council for the opportunity.
Thank you.